will be recorded and put on our Pathways website for everyone to see. So I'm going to ask everybody to mute their microphones as AJ gets started. And if any questions pop up, we'll have some time at the end of the webinar to ask those, but also be free to send them directly to me in the chat box, and I will make sure they get to AJ. So AJ, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, and I will pass it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here with you today. I've been looking forward to this presentation for quite some time now, and I really appreciate the opportunity to present. It will by no means be a comprehensive presentation. The information that I'm going to cover is about an hour-and-a-half webinar, but I've tried to select key points for 20 to 30 minutes. And I thought it would be appropriate to begin by offering up a prayer. So I wrote one specifically for this occasion, and I understand this is an interfaith group, so I tried to offer a prayer with universal appeal. And I'd like to invite each of you in your own way to join with me now. Divine Holy One, creator and sustainer of the universe, author and perfecter of our faith, we come before you in boldness and humility. We come before you fighting for the life you desire for us to live. We come before you pleading for air in the lungs and joy in the spirit. We lift up our brothers and sisters in love. Let our language affirm their existence. Let us recognize vulnerability to suicide and propensity for life. Let us respond to our own needs, so we can also respond to the needs of others. Let us share prevention and healing resources, which you have so generously shared with us. Let us embrace dependency upon you in our moments of weakness, for you give us strength. In our moments of confusion, you give us clarity. In our moments of unrest, you settle our souls. In our moments of darkness, your light shines upon us. For as long as you have given us breath, there is hope. We come before you today as imperfect instruments of your beautiful hands, asking that you guide this conversation so that we become better conduits of the value and meaning and purpose and significance which you've placed upon our lives. Oh, Holy One, bless us today so that we might in turn bless one another. Bless us with your peace, your presence, your provision, and your protection. Amen. So the learning objectives for today's call include identifying language, which invites authentic discussion, recognizing vulnerability to suicide and propensity for life, being proactive and responsive to both ourselves and others, and acquiring and sharing resources for prevention and recovery. Let's start with language. Now, I want to commend Pathways to Promise and the many organizations that are represented on today's call for having the desire to lean into this discussion and the courage to continue the life and death conversation in your own faith communities. Talking about suicide prevention attempts and recovery can be difficult, but not talking about it can be deadly. Let's approach this discussion with carefulness, understanding that people are impacted by suicide in many different ways. We don't know who is in this room that may actually be thinking about suicide today. Almost every time that I do a suicide prevention presentation, someone will approach me after the fact and tell me how they've been wrestling with thoughts of suicide. And because faith leaders are not exempt from this visceral battle for life, let's agree to the following understandings. We agree to be gentle with ourselves and others. We agree to use sensitive language. Let's try to say die from suicide instead of committed suicide, so that we're speaking about the cause of death instead of speaking condemnation. Let's agree to avoid sharing graphic details which may be upsetting to ourselves or someone else. And this one's really key. Let's agree to seek support from others when we are vulnerable to suicide. Suicidal thoughts can disrupt our ability to think clearly, so let's agree to seek support, safety, and guidance from those we trust. We agree to speak words of life. So why is it important to speak the words of life? Well, as the Muslim poet has said, the words that you speak become the house that you live in. In the words of the Jewish and Christian ancient texts, the tongue has the power of life and death. And in the words of a leader from my own faith community, language shapes who we are and what we become. Let's take a moment to recognize. The fact is, most people have had thoughts of suicide at some point in their lives. Perhaps you can relate to some of these statements. Lord, just take me now. Make the pain go away. I wish I'd never been born. I want to go to sleep and never wake up. Not all thoughts lead to action, but all actions are precipitated by a thought. So it's important that we recognize our own desires, our own thoughts, and our own feelings. It's important to remember that depressive thinking decreases the ability to see clearly, similar to how fog can blind us. Decide ahead of time to call and reach out for support from someone you trust to help navigate through the situation. Well, how do I know if my thoughts and feelings are serious enough to involve somebody else? Remember, you are the best expert on yourself. You're not the only expert, but you're the only person who has lived in your body for your entire life. You know yourself better than anyone else possibly could. So ask yourself, what advice would I give to someone I love who's experiencing what is happening to me? And if you would tell someone else to get help, make sure that you follow your own advice. So if I know that I'm going to call somebody, who am I going to call? Lifeliners. Okay, that was kind of like Ghostbusters. For those who are a little bit older, might recognize that tune. So lifeliners are super important. And I want you to think about all the people you know and identify at least 5 individuals whom you're willing to confide in if you are thinking about ending your life. Why 5? Well, maybe the first 4 aren't available when you dial. So it's important to have a comprehensive support group. Which family member do you trust the most? Perhaps you don't have a family member that you trust, which just means you want to identify more people in other categories. Who in your faith community makes good decisions? Which friend is going to love you no matter what? Who is your counselor or medical doctor? Which neighbor, colleague, or fellow student will help you? I have a neighbor, and she has a fence that separates my yard and her yard, and we chat occasionally, and we call it fence time. And the neighbor and the colleague and the fellow student truly are our peers. They're people with mutual standing with one another. Remember, your life has value and meaning and purpose and significance. Even when it doesn't feel that way, even when the world doesn't make sense, even when you want to end the pain, even when you doubt God. So let's shift our focus from ourselves to recognizing vulnerability in another person. Here are some of the indicators. Someone may be feeling vulnerable to suicide if they feel trapped or hopeless about a situation, if they have a preoccupation with death or dying, if they want to be left alone or isolate from others, if they give away their belonging or prized possessions and they begin to get their affairs in order, if they change their routine, such as sleeping or eating habits, if they increase their use of alcohol, drugs, or risk-taking, and this could range anywhere from just stopping wearing my seatbelt to actually reckless driving. If they say they want to die or they'd be better off dead. If they reference a specific method for suicide, having a plan, and especially when there's access to means, such as a gun, such as medication, such as car keys if someone might be reckless driving, this indicates that someone is in greater danger. And as long as it's safe, stay with that person until you can get help. I want to just comment that these are not one-size-fits-all statements. For example, there may be some of us on this call that have had a preoccupation with death in lieu of the recent coronavirus. It's been on the media, it's been in our minds. With the death of Mr. Floyd, with the killing of Mr. Floyd, violence and dying might also be on our minds. It's possible that somebody may want to get their affairs in order, and you think, well, it's a little odd for a 27-year-old to do that, but maybe that 27-year-old is expecting a new baby, and maybe they've decided to get their affairs in order. So I just want to share that these are general indicators, but we definitely want to look at each situation as it presents itself. So I want to break this down even more. Who do you know that's vulnerable to suicide? Did you know that older adult white males have the highest rates of suicide? And for folks who want to use the chat box, I want you to think about who do you know in your community that fits this description. And if you could type in the relationship to that person, you don't have to type in a name, but if folks want to type in, well, I know a grandpa or I know a neighbor, feel free to use the chat box for this reason. Did you know that historically suicide rates have doubled during financial recessions? So who in your life do you know that's lost their job during COVID-19? Did you know that the profession with the highest rates of suicide is medical doctors? Is there a doctor in the house? Some of you may have seen on the news Dr. Lorna Breen. She served as the medical director of the emergency department at New York Presbyterian Allen Hospital in Manhattan. And she saw patients dying before they could be admitted, and she felt helpless over her inability to do more. Oftentimes when we go to our doctor because the doctor's taking care of a need that we have. But we can also keep in mind that doctors have needs themselves. Did you know that Christian leaders have more known suicides than any other faith leaders? Now, that last statement is not based on statistical research, just based on Google research. As I was preparing for this presentation, I tried to look at different faith traditions, and I could not find public information about suicides from other faith leaders. But I did find a substantial amount in the Christian tradition. And regardless of what tradition that you are part of, the real question in your own life is your faith community talking about suicide prevention? Are you leaning into those difficult conversations? And I know that if you're on this call today, you absolutely are. Again, remember, your life has value, meaning, and purpose and significance. And this is a good statement to convey to others, even when it doesn't feel that way, even when the world doesn't make sense, even when you want the pain to end, and even when you doubt God. Some things that we want to keep in mind is that we're complex beings, and having a vulnerability to suicide does not negate one's intelligence, one's capability, one's values or ethics. We have a propensity for life, and as the saying goes, feed what you want to grow. Repeat after me. Your life has value. Your life has meaning. Your life has purpose. Your life has significance. If there was one part of this presentation that I would like to spend more time on, it's about propensity for life. But that will wait for another day. So let's look at responding. In very simple terms, categories this into prevention, which is pre-crisis, the attempt, which is the crisis itself, and the recovery, which is the post-crisis. We want to be proactive and responsive to both ourselves and others. In terms of prevention, talking about it is just so important. The more that we talk about it, the more that it liberates other people, and it gives other people permission to talk about it. Staying connected, building relationships with others is one of the strongest, most proactive things that we can do to prevent suicide. In our local community, we had a teenager that attempted suicide just within the last few days. And, you know, we definitely want to make sure that especially if we're in the helping role, make sure that we ourselves are safe, and then we make sure that others are safe. Just like the analogy of the plane, the oxygen masks come down, we need to make sure that we are safe first, and then make sure others are safe. For the recovery, we need to identify exactly what's needed to live well, and we need to connect with people who have lived experience. So the next slide is responding when somebody says that they're feeling suicidal. And I've listed some things that are helpful and harmful. You know, first of all, don't panic. If you're feeling a little bit nervous, like you don't quite know what to say, that's okay. One of the very best things that someone ever said to me, and I'm just realizing I don't think that I shared that I'm a person that have had reoccurring thoughts of suicide on a regular basis. And one of the best things that somebody ever said to help me was, you know what, AJ, I don't quite know what to say right now, but I just want you to know that I love you and I care about you and I'm here for you. I might fumble a little bit, I might say the wrong thing, but I'm in your corner. So it could be harmful to panic, but it could be helpful to be real. The other thing is we don't want to use guilt or shame as a motivator. And this includes telling people that they'll go to hell if they kill themselves, or describing how bad their family members are going to feel if they're no longer here. And I'm sure nobody on this call would do this, but I've heard from others that people have actually said, well, suicide's a coward's way out. So instead of using guilt or shame as a motivator, use love as a motivator. This is what faith communities are good at. We are good at sharing the love. We are so good at loving up on one another. Make sure that you love up on people and just express your love, express your concern for someone else. We don't want to assume that we know what someone may or may not need. What works for one person may not be helpful for another. So it could be helpful to actually ask. Ask somebody, how can I be helpful to you? And if the individual says, well, I don't know. If I knew what would help, I would do it myself. I mean, there are times that you may get a little bit of pushback. That's okay. Don't back away from that pushback. Just receive it. And if somebody says, I don't know, that's why I came to you, you can follow that up with, well, let's think about that. Why did you come to me? What is it that you're hoping to gain? And I'm gonna be here for you. I'm gonna do the very best that I can. We don't want to interrupt. We don't want to do all the talking. We want to listen. We want to be fully present, even in silence. It can be a very powerful thing to sit side by side with another person and not say a word. We don't want to minimize feelings or experiences. We want to hear and validate what somebody else is feeling and experiencing. And this last one, for those of you who have had suicide prevention training, this last one may be a little bit different than some of the previous trainings that you've had. But instead of asking someone to sign a contract or a commitment or a promise, why don't we make commitments to stay with somebody until they feel better or until they get help? If we look at the origin of where that contract came from, the contract was developed to alleviate liability. It was not necessarily developed as a helpful tool for the individual who's vulnerable to suicide, though it could be helpful. It was developed to be helpful for the person who is in the helping role. So good kinds of contracts. The military uses something called the battle buddy system. And basically the way this works is that you have two individuals who are in the fight together, and it works beautifully if it's peer-to-peer. And there's a commitment made, there's an agreement made that if I am vulnerable to suicide, I will not take any action to harm myself or end my life without talking to you first. And the idea is to stay safe until they've talked to that person. And I'm going to trust my battle buddy to navigate the situation when I may not be able to. So responding. Here's an action plan for me and an action plan for others. And again, these are just a few ideas. It's by no means comprehensive, but something that could be really helpful both in the pre-crisis and the crisis and the post-crisis stage would be to write or review reasons to live. Another thing that could be helpful is staying with others. Now, for some people, that might be spending the night with family or friends. For other people, it might be going to a peer respite center. And for others, it might be going to the hospital. That's why it's so important to ask, how can we be most helpful to somebody? And try to keep that individual in the driver's seat as much as possible. We can remove means. I already mentioned about giving the car keys to a spouse. We could lock weapons in a storage locker away from home. And we can also call a crisis line. They're available 24/7. Some action plans for others. Again, express that someone's life has value, meaning, purpose, and significance. And this is not just in the moment. This is both before or after an attempt. I will say with you that responding to someone in crisis, someone who is mid-attempt or on the brink of attempt, is critically important in that life-saving moment. But there are other opportunities to have critical importance. And when I think back on my own experiences, it wasn't the emergencies that made the most difference. It was the relationships that were built with people that they earned trust and they could speak into my life. It was all those conversations in the hallway, those life moments when people spoke about what life really means. That had sustaining value. We can actually ask if someone is thinking about killing themselves. That's a question that we can just put it out there and ask. We definitely want to make sure that we are safe before trying to intervene with someone, particularly if someone has a gun. And we can utilize the SAVE method. Well, what's a SAVE method? This is adapted from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. The SAVE method is just signs of suicidal thinking should be recognized, and we've talked about the importance of recognizing that. We should ask the most important question of all. We should validate the individual's experience and expedite whatever level of support is needed. And I will say this is adapted. The original SAVE model said encourage and expedite treatment. But as has already been mentioned, different people have different needs. So some people may not need a hospital, but they may need to spend the night with a friend. So whatever level of support is needed, that's what needs to be expedited. Well, what's the most important question? The most important question is, are you thinking about ending your life? You see, asking this question doesn't perpetuate suicide. People are literally dying to be heard and validated. Yet if we fail to ask this question, it might result in suicide. So take courage and ask this most important question. And if you have a concern that it might be upsetting to someone, ask yourself this: would I rather this person be upset with me in 3 days, or would I rather attend this person's funeral? That's a very real question. That's not a statement of motivating with guilt. It's a very real statement that someone who potentially is suicidal may not be around in a few days. The other thing is there's a movie called Suicide: The Ripple Effect by the gentleman of the name of Kevin Hines. And he talks about standing on the bridge. He was known for jumping over the Golden Gate Bridge. He talks about standing on the bridge and just wishing, just hoping that somebody would stop him and ask him, hey, why are you on the edge here? Are you okay? Are you thinking about killing yourself? So I just want to encourage you, take courage and ask this most important question. I also want to make sure that you walk away resourced. I want to resource you today. So here's a few things that I found to be helpful. The first one is the Faith, Hope, Love, Celebrating Reasons to Live campaign. And there's the website, but this interfaith campaign, it offers different kinds of communication aids and other resources for mental health promotion, suicide prevention. The Ripple Effect, I already talked about this. It's a film that chronicles the life of Kevin Hines, who at age 19 attempted to take his life by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. Since then, Kevin's been on a mission to use his experiences to help others stay alive and find recovery. I want to give a shout out. I saw the people on the screen. I saw we had representation from Crossover Ministries. It's a rural area in southern Illinois, Hillsboro, Illinois. They actually had this film screening and made it available for their community. So the churches were coming, but they held it at a local school. The schools came. It was in the newspaper, and they held it in Hillsboro, they held it in Litchfield, which was a neighboring town, and one of the things that happened as a direct result of that film is that there was a county board member attended, and she went back to her county board member meeting within a week or two, and they issued a proclamation on suicide prevention at the county board level. So I want to give a shout out to those campaigns and those public film screenings. The next thing I want to talk about is RAP. RAP is an evidence-based mental health education curriculum. It's something that anybody can use to get well, to stay well, and to make their life the way that they want it to be. And there are many RAP classes, RAP facilitators throughout the nation. I will share with you that Gift of Voice is offering an online RAP for Life. And the focus of this class is specifically suicide prevention and suicide attempt recovery. And it'll be for individuals that have reoccurring thoughts of suicide and for individuals that recently have attempted suicide. But if you go to the Copeland site, she sells these books for about $10. And on the left side, you'll see this red is for the mental health recovery. Blue is for addiction recovery. Purple is for service members and veterans. And they just come out with a new one for people who've been incarcerated, who are reentry. So they have all kinds of wellness resources. If you are interested in the RAP for Life class, feel free to contact me. My contact information is going to be on my last screen. The next resource that I want to put out here are warm lines. And I know that we have people from all across the United States on this call. So this link is a directory to all the warm lines throughout the United States. And this is when you call this number, some of them are available 24/7, some of them are Monday through Friday. But when you call this number, you will get to talk to a person in mental health recovery, somebody who's been there and done that. I want to give a shout out to Trinda Hedges as well. I saw that she was one of our guests on the Warm Line. She runs the Illinois Warm Line, and they do a phenomenal job. And Warm Lines, they can be used they're typically not a crisis line. Typically, they will refer you to a crisis line. But Warm Lines can be used for both prevention and also recovery after an attempt. Another fantastic resource is peer respites, and depending on where you are in the country, you may or may not have access to these. But peer respite's a voluntary short-term overnight program. It provides community-based and non-clinical crisis support to help people find new understanding and ways to move forward. It is open 24/7. So here's a link to the different peer respites throughout the nation. And just by saying non-clinical support, I want to clarify That doesn't mean that clinical support is bad. It just means that this is peer support, and we should have a diverse array of services so that way a person has choice and they can identify what will be most helpful in meeting their own needs. The next resource is truly one of the best resources that I've seen, and I'm just going to. This is a booklet, a handbook for somebody who has recently attempted suicide. I'm just going to read the topics. I've got it on my desk here. I'm just going to read you the table of contents. How did it get to this point? Page 1. Page 2, Terry's story. Page 3, what am I feeling right now? Page 4, am I the only one who feels this way? Page 5, Jordan's story. Page 6, taking the first steps forward. Talking with others about your attempt. Reestablishing connections. Planning to stay safe. Finding a counselor. Getting what you need from counseling. What if you don't go to counseling? Moving toward a hopeful future on page 21. This includes maintaining hope, staying in control by being organized, getting in touch with your spirituality, maintaining a healthy lifestyle, taking medication, do I or don't I? Advocating for others to support your recovery, hopes for a safe journey. And it does have some examples of some safety plans, but this is a fabulous resource. I encourage everyone on this call, go to the SAMHSA store, order a couple of these, and when you have somebody come to your faith community who's recently attempted suicide, or maybe like the young lady in our own community, maybe the teenage daughter just attempted, and what do I do? This is a fantastic resource for that person. We're coming up on the end of our presentation. I couldn't end this presentation without talking about Life Matters. So Life Matters is a curriculum that Gift of Voice is in the process of developing. And we have different training modules. One of the training modules, it was actually the very first one that we completed, was entitled Spirituality. And it actually examines the meaning and the purpose and the significance and the value of our lives. This peer specialist training was designed specifically for use in the public mental health system, but it can easily be adapted for faith communities. And then finally, I just like to share, this is from my own faith tradition. This is a verse that means a lot to me. It's Psalm 118:17. It says, I will not die but live, and I will proclaim what the Lord has done. And folks, if you get nothing else out of this call, get this. He has done good things. He wants to give us good gifts. And with that, I'm going to stop and turn it back over to the moderator for any questions. Thank you.